Well, good morning, everyone. I hope you are enjoying your sessions here at ACE. ACE this year has 4 themes, and one of those themes is social justice and equity. It's a complex theme, it's an emotional theme, and it's a very broad theme. If I were to just say a few words, it can just put a picture in your mind as to what kinds of issues we are talking about. Flint, Michigan, Eric Garner, Tamir Rice, Michael Brown, Sandra Bland, Black Lives Matter, income inequality, health disparity, Occupy Wall Street, undocumented, ban the box, my brother's keepers. I think you get the picture. I come from Houston, which is not just a very diverse city, but it is also one of the most ethnically balanced cities in the United States. And according to Dr. Kleinberg from Rice University, the entire nation will look like Houston in 25 years. So this is the context within which we are governing our institutions, we are serving our institutions and our students, and this is the demographic trend against which we have to think about the issues that we face today. To grapple with some of these issues, we have 2 extraordinary talented people here, and it's my pleasure to introduce them to you. We have Dr. Kent McGuire, and we have Marta Tienda. Kent is president and CEO of the Southern Education Foundation, an organization that advances equity and excellence in education for all. Prior to joining the foundation, Kent was Dean of the College of Education at Temple University and also professor in the College of Education. He served in the Clinton administration as Assistant Secretary of the Department of Education. Marta is a Maurice P. During Professor in Demographic Studies and Professor of Sociology and Public Affairs at Princeton University. She's past president of the Population Association of America, a former Guggenheim Fellow, a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, a member of the American Academy of Political and Social Sciences, and a member of the National Academy of Education. She has co-authored over 200 chapters and articles on the topic. So Kent and Marta, thank you so much for being here. What I'll do is I'll just ask you a few questions, and when I get a signal, I will just open it up for question and answers. So let's begin. The topic is, of course, very broad, very emotional, as I said, and very complex. So first, I'd like to offer both of you maybe 3-4 minutes of opening remarks, particularly highlighting the 2 or 3 trends that you see from your vantage point that frame this context and what we need to be thinking about.
I think we ought to start with
All
the
right.
most
We'll start with Marta.
Yeah.
Either way, I'm happy to do so. Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be here. And Molly is incredibly persuasive. Doesn't give up. So either we should not do that as educators either. We should never give up hope for what is possible in education. So it's quite encouraging. I am a demographer by training, and I study trends and differentials in many dimensions. So one of the issues that I would like to point out is the diversification of the college-age population. It's both good news and bad news on that front. It's an exercise more than bean counting, but I would like to emphasize, so there's a lot of good news. Our campuses are a lot more diverse today than they ever were historically, and that's going to be true from now on because our population is becoming more diverse. That said, education inequality is rising because enrollment gaps are increasing. So even though we're more diverse on a composition at any campus, that isn't the metric we should be using. We should be looking at enrollment rates relative to the denominator, and there we are losing ground. We can do better, and that's an opportunity for higher education. The second thing that worries me a great deal is the rising cost of college. Some of the trends, we know that the tuition has been rising very fast, much more than inflation. That's a trend. Okay, so it's slowed down. It's still slowed down at a rate that's way above the growth in incomes. So that's putting a college squeeze on the lowest income groups. And that is very concerning at a time of rising income inequality, because the number of students who are vulnerable to not being able to access college has been rising over time. There's a great deal that can be done on that front. And there's a lot of good news on that there have been increases in the low-income population because of scholarship programs and individual initiatives. But again, that's looking at gains that are relative to the total population that's eligible, and there we are again losing ground. We're compromising the future of our country by balancing budgets, education budgets, on the shoulders of young people. Many states still have not retained their education budgets to the levels of pre-recession. That's a problem. That's really, really bad public policy, and that's a huge opportunity for higher education leaders. It takes courage, it takes conviction, and it takes staying the course to pursue this. Great.
So I'll just amplify, Marta, a couple of things you said, and then sort of point to a couple of issues I think require more attention. I mean, on this point about cost, if you look at the what's happened since between 1990 and say 2015, in terms of the average cost of college as a percent of family income, if you look at the difference between the bottom and top quartiles, it was 10% of family income in 1990 at the top quartile, was 45% for the bottom income quartile. Today, it's 15 to 20% for the top income quartile, but it's 85% for the bottom. So this burden of attending has really gone up. If you look at the percent of the average cost covered by a maximum Pell Grant, in 1975 it was 67%. In 2015, it's come all the way down to 27%. So here we are at a point where the national ambition is to, well, we've been focused on access for 25 years.
Exactly.
Suddenly, we want to actually focus not just on access and participation, but completion. So the national rhetoric is going in one direction, but the policy debate, I think very much to your point, Marta, is going in the other. And so here, we really need a different narrative about where the country's headed and the role of higher education in all of this. Back in the 70s and even in the 60s, rising tides lifted all boats. We were in a conversation about how to make the pie bigger. And we've sort of slipped into a zero-sum world where more of something for one person comes at the expense of something else. So if ever there was a leadership opportunity for higher ed, we're sort of right on the cusp of it.
I agree.
So Kent, let me follow up. You mentioned cost and affordability, and so from my experience at the University of Houston, we started the program where if your family income is $45,000 or less, once you get admission to the university, there's no cost whatsoever, no tuition, no fee, you don't pay anything. And we were just surprised that in first 2 years, it made no difference. The retention of that particular cohort or that group, which was not paying anything, totally free, wasn't any better than for other students. So then we had to really go and dig into the other issues, social, cultural issues. So can you just address some of that?
Well, I think, first of all, it's important to note that there are these other issues. That money is a big factor, but it's not the only factor. I remember just before leaving Temple, I chaired a task force for the provost. We were concerned about our retention rates. And the closer we looked into it, what we discovered was that one of the biggest factors that inhibited persistence to a degree is that our students weren't taking enough credits, you know, and they were afraid to borrow. That might have been an issue, but have to remember, increasingly, our traditional student is what we used to think of as the non-traditional student. Here we have students who are working, they're taking care of families and siblings, they have a host of pressures. The biggest role that money does play is that it doesn't take much of an incident to disturb their ability to continue, right? So against that backdrop, you have folks not earning enough credit. We had a guidance problem. It's if you can't see a clear path, you might not be the best decision maker, right? We had too many kids students who were really just not on a clear path and taking very inefficient kind of paths. Finally, we had an institutional obligation, Renu, to make sure that they could see an 8-semester sequence, that if they did everything right, that they did their part, they could actually complete. So we should talk about it, but there's lots of things we can do in the way of guidance and support and transparency that would really help.
I think you've raised a really important point about advising. If we miss the advising channel, that many students, especially those who that are first-generation college goers, we're bewildered. I can remember being bewildered. I wanted to be a scientist, but I mentioned that I wanted to do biology and literature, and somebody says, you can't combine humanities and science, and I felt dumb, so I didn't ask a card-carrying adult. That wasn't true, and I never had the advising. So if we tighten up advising, and this is an area where higher education can step up to the plate to guide some of our vulnerable students, I think we can make a big inroad. And yes, there is a big cultural gap. It's not just about money. Money is a necessary condition. Many families are risk averse when you tell them the price of college versus the price of a used car. College, a used car, we need the car. You're going to go to college and do what? So that can be a challenge. The cultural distance, those barriers can be overcome. I was fortunate to have a father who knew the value of education. I'm grateful for that. But I know also that the cultural difference between the Rio Grande Valley in Texas, where I'm from, and the moon is the same as the Rio Grande Valley and Austin, Texas. So getting parents to allow their children to come is a big gap. But exclusion by finance, by default, is just as pernicious as exclusion by design. We've done the exclusion by design for many years. Now we're over that one, but we're excluding by default. And that's more pernicious because we seem to be talking the talk, but we're not walking the walk. This is an opportunity for higher education. And I can go back to Ruth Simmons, who's one of my role models at Brown University when I was on the Board of Trustees. We got the recession and we're doing an organizational review. Where can we find efficiencies and cost-cutting strategies to raise the budget? And she said very clearly, financial aid is not on the table for cutting. And that's a really powerful statement for a leadership of higher education to make sure that this doesn't become an issue. As someone who almost dropped out of graduate school because of finances during the oil crisis, and somebody just heard me talking, I've got to drop out, I don't have any money. I got a little stipend that kept me in. That can make the difference. Just $50 or $100 a month made the difference for me staying in graduate school. So those minor things that you're talking about are so critical.
So Marta, I know you are big on timing, and I know that you have argued before in your work that high school is too late by the time universities reach out to high school, but that may not be sufficient. And I know you promote middle school reach. So could you just tell us the importance of why we need to be in the middle schools and why it's too late by the time we get to high school?
It's not too late because we're the land of second chances, third chances. This is not like one of those highly tracked countries as we have in many European countries. However, there is a pile of research showing that many kids are not college ready by the time they reach 9th grade. And the survey that I did in Texas when I was evaluating the top 10% law, there was a question that President Faulkner zeroed in on. When did you first start thinking about college? The number of kids, the share of kids who said high school was shocking to him. And he said as he went across the state and asked the question to many of his constituents, they'd raise their hand. He said the distribution is the same. We need to change that, because there were some kids who always thought about it, like my kids, who were exposed to college campuses, because I'm their mother, all their life. And they took it for granted, but many kids don't begin even thinking about it. And my own experience was Mrs. Miller, the 7th grade teacher, who asked me what I was going to do when I grew up, and I was going to be a beautician, we call them, it's a hair technician these days, because that's what I did. And she said, you could go to college, and I said, no, it's for rich people. And she said, you could get a scholarship. She changed my life that day. I can remember what she was wearing. And I was in middle school in 7th grade. So from then I had a new aspiration, and since I talked with Molly about participating in the session, I got all the librarians at Princeton looking up the research on middle school to college as opposed to high school to college. There's not that much, but there is some very compelling evidence that focusing on the middle grades, that a nation at risk, focus on the middle grades, and if higher education starts to focus there, that's where our most diverse and poorest population is growing fast. That is our opportunity. People are the resource of this country for the future, especially in the information age. So there is very compelling evidence that that is actually the pivotal point for trying to broaden the pipeline. Rather than plugging it in high school with remedial courses, we can engage in a prevention strategy that allows kids to aspire to understand what is necessary to become a fireman or even to become an astronaut, or whatever it is that they think they may understand, and especially what they can't envision. So I'm a believer that that is the key transition. That's different from just focusing on high schools. That's too convenient. So I challenge our higher education administrators, and I'd be the first to go into the middle schools if I could, if had a way to do it, to try to inspire the next generation. The research is quite compelling, and there are a few good programs that have been tried, tested, and true that need to be scaled up.
Great. Yeah, I know that building expectations and then believing in them that they can actually accomplish that makes a big difference. And I know we get a lot of first generation students, a lot of students from underserved communities, and first week of classes, I go to every freshman class, probably 25 to 28 classes, and I just want to be there. And I basically tell them that they are not dropping out, because I say, you may have known about Tiger Mama, now you're facing Tiger President. You are accountable to me. If you're thinking about dropping out, you're going to send me an email and give me a chance to fix things for you. And I do get hundreds of emails actually from everything, including the one that said, can you please ask my girlfriend to come back, because I'm distressed about that. So it's interesting, all the things. But let me turn to you, Kent, this time first, but I like both of your opinion, and that is, you are the CEO of Foundation, so you get pitched from university about all kinds of ideas of what project, what idea can make a difference. And I wonder, what's your thought about, we as an academic community, are we defining the problem or the issue right? Do we have the right voices that we are listening to? Do we have the right stakeholders at the table for this very important conversation?
Well, I think yes and no is probably the answer. You were just talking about the connection between middle schools and post-secondary education. All too often, those two worlds are like ships passing in the night. And so there's a big opportunity to work through, to figure out how to strengthen the collaboration between these two sectors. I mean, just clarifying for parents and students what it actually means to be college ready would be a useful place to start. the majority of the institutions in this room, or at least a significant number of them, I predict, all get their students from within a couple hundred miles of where they're located. So it's not a mystery where your students are coming from, and yet it's very murky through the eyes of students and parents, what it actually costs to go, what actually takes to get there. We used to run focus groups in the neighborhoods around Temple, and you're absolutely right. If you wanted to detect a college-going culture, you needed to start there just to try to find it, right? So that's an issue. Then there's this issue of kind of what I think of as permeability and transparency. Our system today in higher ed is fairly permeable. You can get in, move around, and get out. It's fairly transparent for the traditional student. But if you're a student of color, if you're a low-income student, and you've got all these factors that I was talking about earlier operating, it becomes a lot less permeable, a whole lot less transparent, and we see that reflected in the completion rates for the population. Third, we have so much more knowledge about how people learn, and we use too little of it in teaching and learning. I'm really intrigued with the partnership that was just announced, because there's a huge upside associated with innovation in pedagogy. And if this was a time when there's this big gap between who the students are that are coming in and what we know about them and the lives they lead, and everything has changed there. Relatively little has changed in terms of teaching and learning. And instead of holding the teaching and learning enterprise constant and allowing outcomes to vary widely, we really need to flip that on its ear and afford much greater variation and innovation in how we run the enterprise in order to tolerate substantially less variation in terms of outcomes.
But imagine if Molly's next initiative is to reframe dropout prevention programs to college retention and job career trajectories, and by involving the business sector, then we could begin to address this in a very pragmatic, realistic way so that they can envision possibilities. So Molly, you've got your work cut out.
Well, let's change the topic a little bit. Recently, I saw a survey that indicated that student activism is on rise on campuses, in the sense that the freshmen of this fall, entering fall, a much larger number of them think that over the course of their college career that they would engage in a protest of some type. Now, we know what has been happening over months, so could you tell us, first of all, what does protest signify? I mean, does it signify there's an underlying issue? Does it signify that actually voices are coming out, which is healthy? And then also tell us about how can we address this or prepare for it in a constructive way?
Well, I think this has been going on for some time. There's been such a focus on diversification per se, as a cause célèbre, rather than inclusion. And I wrote a paper a few years ago, now 3 that's been out, diversity is not equal to inclusion. Simply getting our students of color and getting low-income and high-income students on campus is a necessary condition, it's not a sufficient condition. And I took my own institution to task for enabling these islands of comfortable consensus where students of the like-minded people congregate. That does not promote inclusion, it promotes separation. I understand that it's a tightrope of trying to involve different students, but if we can't, on college campuses, teach and learn about each other, about difference, and find it as a strength, then where? If not now, then when? And if not higher education leaders to lead the charge to promote equity and inclusion on the campuses, to define it in any way possible so that we have students through their curriculum learning about each other difference and its possibilities, then we're not doing our job on campuses to really capitalize on diversity. Diversity is a strength of our country. Every single president has touted what a unique nation we are. We're the nations of immigrants. Every single president across the political spectrum. At the same time, when it comes to trying to foster inclusion, we don't seem to have the metrics to do that. And higher education is a very metric-driven enterprise. We grade teachers, professors, the students grade us, the administrators set our salary, they're obviously grading us, we grade the students, everybody's grading everybody. We grade the football team and the coaches. But we somehow don't have metrics of whether we're making any progress in promoting inclusion. We can do that, and one of the things that I would start is saying, if we have these ethnic studies courses, who's taking them? Is it the sociology of me? Why did I start Latino studies? It wasn't because I wanted to do the sociology and the demography of me, even though I've studied that as an academic subject. It's because I saw it as an opportunity to promote understanding of what this growing population momentum means for the nation as a whole. And that can only be a contribution to higher education and to the growth of the country if it's understood by blacks, whites, Asians, everybody. And that's where I think we're falling short. We're getting to the first stage and then not hitting that swing all the way across. Well, the tennis ball goes anywhere, I've learned. So that's where I think there's a lot more work to be done. And it takes courage and it takes leadership. So what's going on with the Ivy, I was talking about Ebony and Ivy, the book that talks about the role of slavery in the Ivy League, really powerful. Taking that to task and understanding that history, but turning it around the way Ruth Simmons did, again, being a leader, to say, let's deal with this, and then what can we do positive going forward? It's not simply about taking Woodrow Wilson's name off of the policy school at Princeton. I hope it doesn't happen. It's about acknowledging what he did and what he didn't. He was more than a man of his times, and dealing with that history and going forward and constructing and correcting.
That's not a whole lot I can add to that. Not a whole lot I can add to that.
Passionate.
What I guess I'd say is, this is again a moment, I think, in American life at least, when we need to return to sort of what is the dominant narrative that ought to exist in this country, right? We're living in times, to all your points about metrics, if it moves, we'll measure it. This kind of performance orientation is just pervasive. And I'm all for performance, right? But it's been a long time since our presidents and our leaders, even in K-12, have kind of taken the narrative back and really given voice and texture to the role of education in a modern democracy.
Yes.
Right? We're into debates now about, trying to quantify the value of a college degree. We're making these straight line assertions between education and work. That too, you could argue, is necessary, but not sufficient, right? If you look at the current political discourse, it should be painfully obvious how much more conversation we need about how we understand the world, the bigger world in which we live in, and the cultural changes in the country. On the campus, at least, what I'd say is it means we should attend as much to issues of climate as we do competition and success in our athletics and everything else. So again, if not higher ed, then who? Then who? I really do think this is a moment. I'm just thinking back to great presidents before you had to spend so much time and energy raising money. You know, you could actually speak truth to power in ways that's, I think, more nuanced and complicated in today's world. But we got to figure out how to get back to some of that.
Well, you make a very good point, and I think both of you say if it's not higher education, who else then? So let me just go to more pragmatic thing as my last question. So please get ready for your questions, whatever you have with this, which is, do you believe that universities and colleges are using all the tools and authority that they have with them right now to be able to address this issue? Or do you think we are making excuses and there are certain things that we actually have the authority to do, we have the tools to do, but we're just not utilizing them to the fullest extent? Because if you have any such ideas, I think we all can take back to our campuses and
I'm a bad person to ask that question too, because I'm sort of inclined to ask for forgiveness rather than permission, you know, as a rule. I think there is more higher ed can do. I think I'm on an Institute of Medicine panel right now where we're looking at the kind of health disparities and the like, and higher education comes up. We were at our meeting just last week in Washington as one of the real anchor institutions in so many of our communities, especially the communities that are increasingly segregated by race and income, you know, in this country. Corporations can get up and move, but, you know, higher education is, you know, you're sort of grounded there. We could probably do more with our purchasing authorities, our procurement activities. We could probably do more as engines of growth than we do. There's probably more leverage there. But I also think higher education is increasingly aware of all of these and is figuring out how to do a lot more than than they have. More of that's going to need to happen. I also think our research capacity has to turn its attention increasingly to the correlations between how we're organized, institutional practices and norms, and the extent to which it either creates or inhibits opportunity. So, I think there's not enough time on the clock to to get into that.
I think one of the quick excuses will be we don't have the money. We can't do more because we don't have the money. The budget constraint always rears its ugly head. Where there are a lot of things that can be done, they're not really all that expensive. Parents, imagine if school PTAs, instead of raising flowers or doing some of the things they do, they actually try to pair parents to focus on the immigrant kids and the native kids and adopt a parent. If I adopted when I went to California, I realized there was a woman who was going to the PTA meetings, but she didn't understand anything because her English was so weak. So I adopted her. I decided I would tell her what the quiz was, that our children were the same place. So some things can be done without just through reorganization by literally using community tools for engagement. So not everything does have to cost more money. The outreach to there was a very interesting program I read about in San Francisco where there was a focus on changes in curriculum. So the kids most at risk of dropping out were the minority students. And they're already feeling the disengagement, the marginalization. Well, what they were doing was they developed, and in the curriculum, they implemented this course about ethnic studies. And I know in Arizona that doesn't go over very well, or they're trying to exclude it from their curriculum. It turns out that this course, administered, the kids in the 9th grade took it, the metrics of change were amazing. They did a random controlled trial evaluation, what we call the gold standard, and these kids, their absenteeism fell, so they were absent less. Their grade point went up by 1.4 points. Their commitment to college went, their grades, everything went up, and it was really stunning. Now, can this be replicated? I hope so. Can it be brought to scale? Certainly. That would be a first step where university could actually help work with the middle grades and the early high school grades to avoid the marginalization that takes place. It doesn't need to take money. We have the tools, we know how to do it, we're doing it on campus. Why can't we have an outreach arm? So if we think about the cooperative extension service at the universities, what was that all about, the Hatch Act? The Hatch Act was developed so that the learning of the universities could be extended to the farmers. We have all the county commissioners, we had all this extension service. I worked at Wisconsin, I know. So that they could actually get the information out to the growers, and so that our productivity went up as a nation. We can use those models to try to disseminate the research and start changing schools in very productive ways, because the research is, we have enough research base. We have so many examples of what works. What we don't have is enough political will to implement them. And it's not all about the budget. The budget is important, but that should not always be the excuse for inaction. I understand it's a constraint. You know, we all live through these times, but it's also an opportunity to find efficiencies and to really refocus on our priorities. What are our priorities as a nation? Are we committed to reducing inequities? If not education, then what's the platform?
Okay, on that beautiful challenge, I'm going to open it up to everybody here. Do you have questions for our great panelists here? Yes, please. Is there?
Just a second.
Yeah, I've got to get a microphone.
This question is for Dr. Tienda. So I know that you often wrote about the ethnic studies programs, and one of the things I wanted to ask you is, what do you think, what type of curricular advancements do you think need to be occurring in some of our ethnic study programs to really address some of the things that we see happening across the country and particularly on our campuses?
Thank you. One of the challenges we face, one of my colleagues wrote a book, No Longer Separate, Not Yet Equal, and one of the chapters actually documented the enrollment pattern. This was in 10 selective institutions. And you looked at the enrollment of the in ethnic studies programs. Black studies program courses disproportionately attended by African Americans. Latino studies disproportionately attended by Latino students, and Asian studies disproportionately by Asian students. Not complete. That diagonal of enrollment and the subject matter is really profound. That needs to be broken. Students should be required to learn about each other. Think about the football field. The coach is not going to say, well, we're going to have the second tier is going to be Latino and the first tier is going to be white, or the second. We don't devise strategies for football play that way. We don't take that into account. Players don't decide on, oh, should I pass him the ball? Well, no, I don't think so. We don't do that on those terrains. Why do we do it in the classroom? Why do we permit it? Why do we permit it? So in Princeton, I counted the number of programs of ethnic studies groups that we permit on campus. All you need is a secretary, a president, and a treasurer, and then you can petition for funds and have, you know, the Chinese-speaking, the Mandarin-speaking Chinese group, and the non-Mandarin-speaking Chinese group, and the Turkish group. We had this proliferation, and we still have them, because we enable it. The startup costs for doing that are so low. I'd say, okay, fine. Every group wants to be present and be heard, with the condition that 50% or 30% of your membership is not your own group. Otherwise, there's no exchange. There's no learning. We're creating these invisible boundaries within our institutions. So there are ways that we can raise the bar to make that happen. And so in ethnic studies courses, we should require more students to take the classes. It shouldn't only be self-serving. And I can tell you from my own experience, the best teaching moments I have had have been the most diverse classes. When I've had a Latino studies class, after I chaired the National Academy panel, that was diverse across classes and ethnic membership, was amazing. When a student stands up in class and says, I've learned so much from my classmates, you know what the critical mass is. I know it's hard to tell the justices in the Supreme Court that, but there's the kind of learning that takes place. It is possible, and it is our responsibility as educational leaders to make it happen on all of our campuses. Not to do so is going to almost borders on immoral, because we have an opportunity to create the social cohesion through these kinds of programs.
I would just tack on to that, if you sort of broaden it up from ethnic studies to, say, the sort of general education experience on campus.
Yes.
You know, I think we're at a time where we need to, you know, sort of like a Cold War curriculum. And it would be really interesting to rethink
Yes.
in the kind of contemporary society, you know, what are the things we need our students to consider and experience, and how that might be reflected differently in the first 2 years.
I agree with that.
Good.
I agree.
There are more questions. Come on, I mean,
I see a bunch of them
there.
over there.
Okay,
yeah.
please.
Hard to
Yes.
see.
Can't see too well, but they're
Yeah, I
over there.
can see.
Thank you very much. My name is Regina Biddings-Moro, and I am from Purdue University Northwest in Hammond and Westville, Indiana. And I really just want to magnify what Dr. Tienda just said. Some 20 plus years ago, I had the good fortune of having a professor my second year of undergraduate study in a class called Multicultural Affairs. And in her brilliance, she established the curriculum for the class once she knew what the makeup of the class was. And I happened to have been the only African American student in the class, and so she did a survey and developed the curriculum so that it was indeed a cross-cultural experience, making sure that everyone involved was outside of their comfort zone.
Yes.
And so we visited various public venues, churches, other places, mosques, synagogues that we had never been before. And she asked us if we had ever been there before. And then she established the curriculum and made the contacts in order to make that class very meaningful. So I can tell you, standing here many, many years later, that was fabulous. And so I just wanted to magnify that that's the way to go.
Thank you. I really appreciate your comment, because we tend to focus on the visible attributes, but the invisible attributes like the political orientation, differences of opinion have to also be cultivated, and religion is one of those differences that has not been sufficiently underscored. So I think that diversity in its broad construal is really where we need to be going as university, as educators. Thank you.
Okay. I can't see very well here
hand
because of
over
light, so please just pass the microphone and ask.
So I'm going to piggyback with you, Dr. Teniente, but on a different level. We often talk about cross-cultural competencies. And as a K through 12 teacher, one of the things that I always advocated for was understanding those cultural differences and implementing them in the curriculum, integrating them so that when we were teaching anything dealing with history, with sociology, we used metaphors and analogies that were relevant to our students, because as you know, we're all so very different. I often talked about, you know, I use a very simple example. I say, you know, you may be talking about Abraham Lincoln, and you may be saying that, you know, his wife Mary had blue days. And so when you say that to a Latino, the word azul means absolutely nothing. And so when are we going to really emphasize that aspect that says, I don't want you to learn about someone's culture just to recognize the difference. I want you to learn it so that you can teach them better and they can be more successful in their education.
That's a very important point. I remember when my son was in the lab school at third grade, the history teacher, the third grade teacher said, well, in history, we're going to cover everything up to the Civil War. So I raised my hand and I said, does that include the US-Mexico War? And he said, no, we don't have time for that. And I said, but it was before the Civil War. He said, yes, but we don't have time for that. What's wrong with that picture? Already in early grades, we are redefining our history, leaving out 1/3 of the US history because that's where we acquired 1/3 of the nation. That's a problem, and it has been allowed to fester, and these things evolve tacitly. Higher education can play a role by insisting that our histories are fully mapped during those middle years. And there's one other opportunity, and that is the budget. Not only do we not pay enough attention to those middle grades, I looked at the federal outlays. I found a paper. I did a lot of research to try to make sure that I was right about this middle grade as an opportunity. And the federal budget, it drops at that period. So there's a lot of focus on 0 to 3 and early pre-K. That's the big rage these days. Good, I get it. The science is there. That's important. Very high federal outlays now, and also in higher education. But if you look at the federal spending in those middle periods, there's a huge discontinuity. What is wrong with that picture? Why do we drop off? Why do we permit that? Why can't there be enough of a consistent commitment to those middle grades that prepare the students that we want in our institutions? So that's another opportunity, I think, for higher education to start probing the federal budget.
You know, I guess the one thing you just said, Marta, that there's some very real kind of connections between post-secondary and K-12. And you know, the written curriculum, who you think writes those textbooks that find their way into elementary and secondary schools? Who's preparing the teachers who end up, in our schools? I think some very real, a lot of leverage, I'll say it that way, on the broad question of kind of equity and social justice, if we sort of mine those connections between the systems. I saw a question.
I think there's a question here, and then I see a question here. So where's the microphone?
I can't see.
I'm going to be a little partial to my ACE fellow right now. So I saw her hand. I said, that's where I'm going.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning. I'm Kenya Ayers, and an ACE fellow at the University of Houston System with Dr. Renu Khator, my amazing mentor. And when I have to leave, sadly, at the end of May, I will be returning to my host institution outside of Chicago, and I've been asked to lead a consortium that is a pipeline or a network program. And I'm really interested in this conversation about the middle schools because the consortium I'll be leading has 3 sender districts into our community college. And I'd love to hear more about best practices that you've heard of at the middle school programs nationally that we might look at. So if you can give us some recommendations, I'd love that. Thank you.
I would be delighted. I have a whole slew of things. I even took a lot of notes from the articles that I read that I considered quite helpful. This We Believe, there's a report called This We Believe by the Association of Middle Schools, or there are all these different organizations, all the alphabet soup. But the one on This We Believe had a lot of metrics that they know predict college success. We know it, and the evidence is incontrovertible. The report, there's been an update of this report on that was about middle school and the crisis that we were having in education that highlighted the importance of middle school, and the update by the ACT is, they said that nothing's changed. What is wrong with that picture? We got the evidence, we know where we needed to do, and from 2008 to 2014, nothing had changed. Nothing, nobody did anything. Well, that's research going down the tubes, because the research for its own sake, I know people get tenure and they stay in campuses through their research. That's not why we're doing it, especially in the field of education. It's very applied. So there's a very clear, there's some research that was done in Philadelphia about early warning signs, and the same metrics are being identified over and over and over again. So those metrics can be used to turn around. And it can't be just, let's do dropout prevention, because talking to somebody who has all these challenges at home isn't sufficient. Involving them in a junior achievement program where they're responsible adults that can give them ideas about what is practical, realistic, and what it will take to get there, and oh yeah, you can do it. Take I can't out of your vocabulary. I won't is a different story, that's your business. But I can't, yes you can. Everybody can. And I think that's where I'm very much my father's daughter. So that's where I think we have an opportunity to build on existing social infrastructure, if you will, We did this in immigrant integration, so there are some important lessons there. YMCA is a vestige of the Americanization movement. The libraries, a vestige of the Americanization movement. And what the challenges of immigrant integration as immigrants disperse across the nation is that it takes a while to develop that social infrastructure, but it is possible. We have many in Chicago, especially with Hull House and the like, where immigrants were brought into the social mainstream and it was done effectively. We don't have to do the Americanization, boilerplate type of integration, but there are many lessons there that we have lived through as a nation that strengthen our resolve and made it possible to foster inclusion, all the more important as we become more diverse. So yes, we can is my motto, and take I can't out of your vocabulary, I tell all students.
There is a question there.
So Louis Soares with ACE. I want to return to Kent's observation earlier about speaking truth to power. And, college leaders, presidents, their senior teams have many voices in the world. They have the voices as executives of their organizations. They have voices as community leaders. When we're at a time with movements like Black Lives Matter and other movements are pressing on those voices and how they manifest both within their institutions and in the broader community. How do college presidents begin to, given being authentic with themselves, how do they express those voices? How do they be authentic both in their community and within their institutions? How do they reflect it in their budgets? How do they reflect it in their dialogues with community members? I sense that this is a growing topic of interest for our member presidents, and I was wondering if you could reflect on that.
Well, yeah, I think if there was ever a time in American life where we needed to see more of this in all the ways you were beginning to flesh out, now's the time. Marta, you've several times in your comments, you've used the term courage. Yes. And I think that's a relevant phrase. We need more of that. Yes. If you speak truth to power, you've got to be willing to hear the pushback you might get. But presidents don't need to do it alone. Right. I think that they can create the conditions for the kind of discourse on campus and in community that help other people find their voices. And it's easier to do in the company of others than all by yourselves. And yet there are important conversations to have with trustees. We spend a lot of time at SCF working with presidents and trustees on these very issues. Usually we enter the door of institutional effectiveness, but your institution's not effective if this kind of civil discourse isn't also, occurring. If the campus on climate, the climate on campus isn't inviting for all students. But we need that kind of leadership, particularly now. I think people would be surprised at how highly regarded our academic leaders are and how interested we are in hearing from them, both on issues that have to do with our economic and social livelihood, but especially around questions of the health of the country. There's just a dearth of that, in the moment. And it would be wonderful to see more of that exemplified from the academy to help trigger more public discussion, generally. So I appreciate the question.
I agree.
So let me just respond very quickly too, because you asked especially for the presidents. So I just think the first thing important is, whether it's president or any administrator, is to really, truly stand in front of the mirror and look first look at yourself, look at inside of you, because there are two things you cannot pretend, you cannot fake, and that is your belief in shared governance and your belief in diversity. And again, as Marta has said earlier, diversity doesn't mean just the numbers. You know, I have you doesn't mean I see you, and if I see you doesn't mean I understand you. Exactly. And I just think you have to have that deep-rooted belief in your heart that that is truly what you believe in. And you may evolve into that because you may study, you may read, and you may believe in it that, oh yes, I think we should do this. But that doesn't mean you have absorbed it. And until you have really, truly absorbed it in your heart, I just think no matter what you do, how you do, it's going to come out. So I think first thing is truly get that experience and believe in it.
Yes, yeah, this I believe. And then you can act it. It's not symbolic, it's actual.
Right. So I have 13 seconds left in finishing this panel. I like to leave this panel on time, but you know, what a great messages we have here about inclusion, integration, about yes, we can, and yes, we do have tools to do something. So it's not all about excuses, but we know we have challenges, but we know we also have opportunities. So would you please join me in appreciating our panelists and give a big, and thank you. You all have been great audience. Thank you very much. Enjoy.